Hello, BookTube. Matthew at Mayberry Book Club and I have decided to make his channel name a reality and create a little book club of two. So we have been reading books together for quite some time now, having a great deal of fun. Matthew's letting me pick the books, and that's very nice of him to do. And I would argue that my wins have been greater than my losses. And for October, in observance of Halloween, we are reading The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice. This is the second book in what became her long Vampire Chronicles series, following Interview with a Vampire, which was a novel that she wrote that was weirdly marketed. It was no one quite knew what to make of it when it first appeared. It was the story of a sort of a soupy, mopey young man named Lewis who is seduced and turned into a vampire by a character named Lestat. And we get their story, and it goes on for some time. You will have seen that story reflected in, for instance, the movie Interview with a Vampire, and the novel ends. We will get around to Interview with a Vampire. We will do that as well. So I don't want to give you too much specifics about it. But then a little time passed, and then this book came out, The Vampire Lestat, and it marks a change. A huge change, gigantic, that utterly fascinated me the minute that I read it, the minute that I even started it, because it begins in the first person with Lestat himself telling you that you probably remember him because he was a character in Interview with a Vampire. You probably remember him from Lewis's book, but that you really ought not to believe what you read in that book, that it was just Lewis's view of things. It's not really how things happened. Not exactly. That he has his own way to tell the story. I smiled from ear to ear when that happened, and also the opening framework of this novel is Lestat himself, after a long, long time, decades and decades, buried in the ground, hibernating, feasting, renewing his thirst for blood every once in a while with a stray mouse or rat, and listening with supernatural awareness to the outside world as it changes all around him, but not participating in that world until finally he decides to gradually build his strength and claw his way back to the surface, back to walking around amongst other people. The reason that he buries himself is part of Interview with a Vampire, but it doesn't really enter into this book. Instead, he encounters a group of young people who are Anne Rice's best approximation of her son's age group at the time that she wrote Vampire Lestat, and they reveal to him that they know all about him from a book, and that this both intrigues him and outrages him because it isn't his agency, it isn't him telling the story. And when I saw that, I immediately thought of all of the literary antecedents of that kind of gimmick. I think Matthew made a video yesterday on the first part of this. I caught me by surprise. I thought we were going to start next weekend. But in his video, he makes mention of Don Quixote, where at one point famously Don Quixote realizes that his adventures are being chronicled. It's sort of a meta thing, a book within a book. Naturally, my own mind went straight to two other examples. One, which is very old, which is the Odyssey, where Ulysses learns that his adventures are already known. When he casts up as a castaway and an anonymous stranger, a beggar seemingly in a foreign court, he realizes that the stories of Troy are already being told. Actually, Aeneas learns the same thing in the Aeneid, but also just as famously and a lot more recently, the beginning of Huckleberry Finn. It is narrated by Huck Finn, who is a character in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and who mentions that you might know a little bit about him if you've read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and that Mark Twain told that story mostly right with a couple of lies. So it's fun. It's a fun opening gambit to do, to have a character do that. Lestat says at the beginning of this book that he will now tell his story, and he makes all sorts of outsided brags about it, that it's a worthwhile story to tell because he himself is terrific. And that's a brash kind of note that he strikes all throughout. And Matthew read the first part of this book for today. what is the first part called? He read the opening framework and then the section called Lelio Rising, and then he stopped. He stopped there, which, let's see here. He stopped there, which means that I will too. So we are going on to, next week, we will start with the Legacy of Magnus, which is part 2 of the book, and move on maybe 2 parts from there. But once the framing device is done, Lestat starts to tell his own story of the 18th century, of being a minor nobleman in the 18th century, the scion of a minor noble house in the 18th century. And you see right away not only the narrative tone and pace, but also the nature of the story is completely different from the gothic wisteria mopings of Interview with the Vampire. Instead, we have young Lestat equipping himself to go out and hunt a pack of wolves. And the scene where he does that, just flailing away at them, is amazingly dramatic, just amazingly so. And that's only one aspect of the young Lord Lestat. There's all sorts of other aspects to him too. He is all caught up in the Enlightenment, and he has a close friend, a close male friend. Very much that element is the same as Interview with the Vampire. These books are explicitly homoerotic in a way that I found fascinating at the time, because there was no stooping or gesturing to what was at the time the normal way for gay or gay-coded romance to be presented to a reading public. These things weren't meant for gay readership. But nevertheless, it's impossible to avoid. It's impossible to avoid where the vampire passion takes most of the people who hold it. Lestat and his friend eventually make their way to Paris. And the whole while, after the attack of the wolves and an encounter with witches, Lestat feels like there's something awakening in his life. Once he gets to Paris, he starts to feel it more explicitly, because it seems to be concentrated in a mysterious stranger, in the pale, unblinking, marble-like face of a mysterious stranger, someone who has noticed him in his meteoric rise to stardom in the theater. But even before that, long before that, he has an idea, and this is a bit I want to read you here. What caused it? Was it the late night drinking and talking, or did it have to do with my mother and her saying she was going to die? Did the wolves have something to do with it? Was it a spell cast upon the imagination by the witch's place? I don't know. It had come like something visited me upon from the outside. One minute it was an idea, and the next it was real. I think you can invite that sort of thing, but you can't make it come. Of course, it was to slacken, but the sky was never quite the same shade of blue again. I mean, the world looked different forever after, and even in moments of exquisite happiness there was the darkness lurking, the sense of our frailty and our hopelessness. Maybe it was a presentiment, but I don't think so. It was more important than that, and frankly, I don't believe in presentiments. Spoiler, it was a presentiment. And Anne Rice has Lestat do that all the time. His braggadocio, his incredible self-assurance leads him to say things all the time that are just him basically talking out of his tuchus. You sort of have to remember all throughout this book the element that is called into question right at the beginning of this book, which is the truth of the narrator. How much of the Vampire Lestat was more or less not true because of the viewpoint through which it was told. Same thing with the Vampire Lestat. It's not like you're going from falsehood to truth. You're going from one narrator's viewpoint of things to another narrator's viewpoint of things. So you get to know that. And Anne Rice is sort of brashly hoping that you will just come to love Lestat, so that you won't mind when he's bragging, when he's obviously exaggerating his own success, his own charisma. When he's doing those sorts of things and stating them matter-of-factly, you won't mind because you will already like him. And it's very effective. It's so effective that that's probably true. So it's an unbelievably abrupt and energetic and charismatic opening to the second book in the Vampire Chronicles, the exact opposite of Interview with the Vampire. And that is where we stop for this week. We stop with Lestat in Paris. It's a revolutionary era Paris. It's the 1780s. And he is on the threshold of changing forever. And we are going to move on from there for next weekend. I haven't talked with Matthew about it, but I'm assuming that we would read more than one part per week, or we're going to run out of weeks before we run out of the book. I think we should probably go to, well, let's see here. Where was it? We should probably go to Viaticum for the Marquise, for the Marquis. That is, for me, that is part 3. That's at least some way further into the book. We should probably do at least that for next week. But I will once again hold myself to whatever Matthew does. So I'll wait for his video. I won't wait a whole day, but I'll wait for his video to let me know how far I should go before I stop. But the next section is when things really kick off. Although, like I mentioned, this has such a dramatic opening. It is such a trumpets and timpani way to start a book that it is clearly a conscious decision on the part of the writer to break with her own work. And I always love that. I always find that incredibly fascinating. I cheer writers on for doing that, even if the experiment fails. In this case, I don't think it does. I think Vampire Lestat is a huge success as an example of someone doing that. But anyway, that is our section for today. Just the introductory chapter, the introductory parts of the Vampire Lestat, and we will move on next week to the meat of the matter. So I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.